on early hours of Sunday morning. The evil dictator of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, scuttled away from the country he has ruled with an iron fist for the last 24 years. His father ruled it before. Torture, beatings, beheadings. He used chemical weapons on his own people, we're led to believe, which I think is probably true. There is so much torture and horrendous things that happened during his rule of terror in Syria. The question is, what comes next? And also, specifically in this section, we want to ask, what does that mean for the UK? Because we know since the attempted revolution in 2011, uprising anyway, there have been many people coming from Syria to this country, and 99% of those asylum claims have been granted. Do those people go back? Do they stay here? Should they go back? Do they want to go back? Can we send them back, given that their asylum claim was predicated on the fact that Bashar al-Assad was in power and could persecute them? And what's coming next? This new grouping that is in charge now, the coalition, are they going to be any better necessarily? Because previously they include leaders who were celebrating the 9/11 attacks by al-Qaeda, for example. Now, a lot has happened since then. They have in fact had battles with al-Qaeda. It's a really complicated picture. No better person to sort of talk us through this, especially what it means here in the UK, than Andrew Fox, who's a defence expert and research fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Andrew, thank you for joining me today. There's quite a lot to talk about today, and I wonder specifically in regard to asylum seekers whether you think they should stay here in the United Kingdom.
I think it's probably too soon to say. The situation in Syria is still incredibly unstable, and it could go a number of ways. We know that the HTS group that's now taken over have an absolute direct line back to Islamic State and al-Qaeda, and for all the horrors we've seen coming out of Damascus from Assad's prisons and similar. We know also that Islamic State are fully capable of atrocities themselves. So I think perhaps a little bit more time is needed before we start talking about returning people to Syria.
So in terms of what Yvette Cooper was saying, she announced yesterday all Syrian asylum claims have been suspended. Let's have a listen to what she had to say.
Like Germany, like France and like other countries, we have paused asylum decisions on cases from Syria while the Home Office reviews and monitors the current situation.
That's Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary. Do you think this is a wise move from Yvette Cooper, Andrew?
I do. The initial flood of refugees from Syria were fleeing Assad, and they had their own good reasons for being persecuted by him, mainly through opposition to his regime and being a political opponent. We just don't know how HTS are going to behave now they've assumed power in Syria. Now, it could be very well that they go on a purge of their own, or they could follow through with the rhetoric that they've been coming out with, which seems very conciliatory. It doesn't seem especially Islamist. It's extending a hand to Kurds and Christians and other ethnic groups.
They certainly did mention that in their first statement that came out on Sunday. It seemed very conciliatory, didn't it? But then, of course, within hours, we had a situation, and you may well think they're totally justified in doing this, where, given everything that's gone on, where there was a raid on the Iranian embassy, the Iraqi embassy. This is not a stable country.
No, it's not. And they're avowed nationalists, they're avowed anti-Russians, avowed anti-Iranians. And of course, there's no peace in the country anyway. The National Syrian Army, backed by Turkey, are attacking the Kurds in the east and south, who are backed by the United States. So we've now got two NATO members firing at each other's proxies. Islamic State are still present in Syria, and we've seen the Americans deploying B-52s to bomb them in the last week. And then there's other militia groups that have made gains in the south as well. So it's and on top of that, Israel, of course, have extended slightly beyond their current lines to try and set up defensive positions on the west side of Syria. So it's incredibly complex, and there's so much going on.
As of September, there were 6,502 Syrians awaiting a decision on their asylum claim in the UK, most of whom had arrived in the past 12 months. More than 27,000 Syrians have claimed asylum in the UK since the civil war in 2011. 99% of them, those claims have been granted. So what does the government need to do now to monitor this, to make decisions, to make informed decisions on this as well? Because if you have HTS, the group you mentioned there, which is a prescribed and still a prescribed terrorist organisation, should it be de-prescribed so we can have discussions with them? What should happen now, do you think, Andrew?
Well, under anti-terror legislation, we can't have conversations with them while they're a prescribed terror group. We're not allowed to give any aid or any support to them whatsoever.
Yeah.
So I think the best way to approach this would be an international one, and come up with some sort of international allied consensus as to how we are going to deal with HTS going forward in a variety of Western countries. And at least that way there'll be unanimity between the approach that the international community is taking.
Yeah, very good point. Sorry, go ahead.
And other than that, I genuinely think, and it's not a hugely helpful answer, but it is just a waiting game now to see if they go full jihadi or whether they are the reformed entity that they claim to be.
Shamima Begum's lawyer says that her hope of returning to the UK has been boosted by the fall of Assad. I mean, she was a jihadi bride and basically a jihadi. I don't think she should ever come back to the UK. What do you think, Andrew?
No, I fully agree with you, and it seems to me that he's chancing his arm with that comment. We know there are 50,000 Islamic State fighters still in camps in northern Syria. I've spoken to people who've been there. They are a tinderbox waiting to go up. So that's something that we need to keep a very, very stiff eye on, because the last thing this incredibly complex situation in Syria needs is 50,000 extra jihadis running around the countryside. But in terms of Shamima Begum, no, I'm very happy with the legal decisions that have been made to make sure that she can't come back to this country. ISIS were unforgivably horrific, and she voluntarily took part in what they did. And that, for me, is certainly a red line.
Thank you very much indeed. That's Andrew Fox there from the Henry Jackson Society. He is a research fellow there. He's also a defence expert, so thank you to him. Let's talk